Good evening, everyone, and welcome to a discussion of EOM Exact XAT1. So let's start with an understanding of VALR as well as the decision-making section. We are going to look at the overall pattern and then follow this up with an understanding of what were the particular question types, assess therefore what are the moderate and easy questions and doable questions, and look at our overall percentiles, look at our sectional percentiles and then overall percentiles. So what was exact XAT VA pattern, exact XAT1 VA pattern? Obviously, this was very much patterned on XAT 2020, okay? And therefore, 26 questions totally, 14 questions of RCs. There were 4 RCs with 3 questions each, just as you had it last year. 1 poem with 2 questions. 6 critical reasoning passages, 2 parajumbles, 2 sentence completion questions, and 2 grammar questions. Overall, this can be called moderate to difficult with more leanings towards moderate. This was not an extremely difficult paper, interestingly, because the VA section generally tends to be heavy, but you would find a lot of things that were not heavy and challenging to read. Okay, so let's do a further analysis of this. What were the various RCs? The first RC was the one on climate change, measuring global warming, roughly around 350 words, which is not a very lengthy one, much in keeping with the kind of RCs that appeared in XAT 2020. 3 questions. You'd find that the first 2 questions were inferences, and the third one was a strengthen question. The third one was the only difficult one because you really needed to, understand the passage very carefully to get this. The passage itself was not a difficult one, but there are 1 or 2 ideas towards the end of the passage, especially a description of the diachronic time and synchronic change, etc. So unless you understand that, probably the second inference question as well as the strengthen question could not be taken. Okay. So overall, something that you should have attempted in comparison to the others. The poem certainly was a very, very familiar one. I'm sure many of you have studied this poem in your school days. The poem is Rudyard Kipling's If, and just 8 lines out of it, one paragraph, one stanza of the poem. 2 questions. Actually, the title, if you know the poem, you have a background of this, then even the title wouldn't be difficult. Okay. But yes, the options of the title question were very close, and then you'd have to carefully eliminate them. The inference question, which asked you to identify which of the following does the author not agree with, right? That was a moderate one, definitely could be done. The poem itself was not abstract and very much doable. Okay. Next, let's look at RC3. Economics, it talked of differential rewards for women. But look at the length of this passage, just a 155 words. Barely the length of a critical reasoning passage or a summary passage of CAT. And 3 questions. Yes, the idea was difficult. You would have to read the passage twice at least to get a sense of what it's saying. And even while doing the questions, to eliminate the options, you'll have to keep going back to the passage, referring to the ideas there. But very much doable. Yes, the primary purpose question was a difficult one. Primary purpose generally tends to be difficult. Main idea is easier, but to identify the purpose of the author can be a little challenging. So pretty close. Those 5 options were pretty close, but the inferences were easy. RC4 on healthcare, improving healthcare for all patients and improving the relationship between hospitals and the facilities available at hospitals for patients. A very, very easy read, extremely easy read, easy language, and 220 words, just about 220 words. 3 questions. The ease of the easy language of the passage, the fact that the topic itself is not a very heavy one, makes this entire thing a very, very moderate one, easy to moderate. In fact, one of the specific detail questions is an easy one. You just have to locate that detail. The main idea is moderate, and the logical structure question, the third one, is also moderate. So definitely something you could do. You could easily do RC4. You could do RC3, though the language was difficult. Reading of the passage 2 times or even 3 times, because the length is not much, would give you clarity there. You could certainly take climate change, the first passage. And if you are not comfortable with poems, of course, you let this go. Otherwise, certainly something that you should have taken, which means RC1, RC2, RC3, RC4, all of them are doable. All right. Now, what about RC5? Now, this is the only one that would be slightly annoying, because in terms of reading, it has some jargon and therefore, heavy. And the length is 155 words, not very lengthy. But then, since there's, some jargon, it will take you a while to read this. Okay. But there were two inferences that can actually be marked easy. The primary purpose question was the difficult one, but the two inferences can be marked easy. But, largely speaking, you stay away from this passage because you see that jargon and you think that this is going to be difficult. The critical reasoning questions. Look at the kind. There's a nice variety here. Of course, two inferences. There is a summary or essence question. There's a flaw in the reasoning question. There is a conclusion question. But look at the markings here. They're all marked moderate except the resolve the paradox question. Resolve the paradox because you've got to identify the paradox itself, that the question type itself is quite challenging. Otherwise, again, something that you should have done. Okay. Now, let's look at the vocabulary questions. The two text completion questions, sentence completion questions, one of them was difficult. The second one is a moderate one. The sentence completion second question was a moderate one because you could capture, you could identify one keyword there for one of the blanks and easily locate the answer. The two questions of grammar, the first sentence correction question may be moderate to difficult. It was slightly confusing because the sentence itself was lengthy. It ran into almost 3 lines. So sentence itself is a little lengthy. That makes it heavy. Error detection can be marked difficult because, yes, locating those errors can be quite challenging, especially since you're talking of 6 sentences. Okay. Parajumbling. The two questions of parajumbles had 5 sentences each, and question 8 was moderate. Question 22 was a slightly difficult one because finding those links was not very easy. All right. So, overall, look at it. You have a huge number of moderate questions. And that means that let's get to, the total number of moderate and the total number of difficult in a while. Let's also close our understanding of decision making. Once again, very much on the lines of XAT 2020 pattern, 2020, 21 questions totally. And yes, by now you know that the suggested time for decision making is about 45 minutes. The suggested time for verbal VA sectional is about 50 minutes, which you can even stretch to a 55 minutes, use the 5 minutes that you get here. If you think verbal is your strength, then you can actually score more or attempt more questions in verbal. So 45 minutes suggested time, you had a total number of 10 caselets, business, situational, and ethics. Interestingly, you didn't have a number of situational caselets here. Most of the caselets were business decision making. And that made this sectional rather challenging because, in business caselets, eliminating those options and knowing exactly what must be the right decision for a business to make is not easy. All right. So, what was the division? You had 3 caselets with 3 questions each. You had 5 caselets with 2 questions each, and 2 caselets with 1 question each. Right. Now, this itself makes it slightly lengthy. You'd find that this 45 minutes you've allocated, might have been heavy. You might even have stretched it beyond 45 minutes because there was quite a bit of reading to be done. When you have so many caselets, compare this with having, let's say, 6 caselets with 3 questions each. That means the reading and the data compilation, the fact identification is, to do with fewer caselets. Your reading time is reduced. Now, your reading time itself is a lot here. Okay, which is why this is marked moderate to difficult, though of course not mentioned here. You can take it as slightly higher than simply moderate. Decision-making sectionals are normally marked moderate. I did mention this in our last discussion. But then, here is a sectional, because it had a lot of business scenarios, you can even mark it moderate to difficult, not just moderate, but a little more than that. All right. Now, look at the various ones. You had the first one, which was an ethical decision making. Even an ethical decision making is not an easy one. It's those situational decision making that tend to be easy because you can relate to that situation. Very often those situations happen to be common happenings. Now, this one had, two difficult questions and one moderate question. Caselet 2, again, ethical decision making. Two questions only, both can be marked moderate. So something you could actually relate to. The second caselet, the first one was quite challenging. The third caselet, which is again a business decision making scenario, had just one question, quite a paragraph that you had to read, and definitely difficult, not an easy one. Likewise, the fourth one, just one question based on that business decision making scenario, difficult one. Okay. Now, look at caselet 5, business decision making again. 3 questions. Thankfully, you find them moderate. Okay. This is a caselet that you can relate to. Moreover, the options are not tricky. The options are not very close. Can definitely be done. As I mentioned, please go correlate these question numbers, the caselet numbers, to the actual caselet, and read these caselets again, revisit them to understand, what are the easy ones, what are the ones that are common, where the trickiness is less, which you can, take in the actual exam too. Unless you gather this kind of learning of, an ability to understand which business decision making scenario is not a complex one, doesn't have a number of aspects to be considered, and is fairly straightforward, unless you are able to judge that or identify them, you are going to have a difficulty in selection. And selection is extremely important in decision making, to be able to know which are those caselets where my judgments, my decisions, my analysis of the facts can be absolutely right, and I can get these questions right, where the chances of my inaccuracy are reduced, and which are those scenarios that are slightly complex, which involve multiple parameters, which involve several stakeholders and several aspects to be considered, aspects that I'm not familiar with because these are new business things for me, correct? That is the learning that you must get, which requires careful analysis. Unless you correlate the way in which this has been marked, the way in which you have been getting questions right, to what these caselets are, what these question types are, there is never a learning. All right. That analysis is extremely critical for you to do well and perform consistently in decision making. Otherwise, mind you, there is no learning. Everything becomes a very subjective response. Okay. So, caselet 6 again, business decision making, 2 questions. You'll find that one is marked difficult and the other is an easy one. Caselet 7 was again a business decision making one. Look at the flood of business scenarios here. This is what made this sectional difficult. In fact, both those questions of Caselet 7 are difficult. And Caselet 8, another business scenario, had 2 difficult questions and 1 moderate one. Look at the huge number of difficult questions we are looking at. Caselet 9, which had 2 questions, had 1 moderate and 1 difficult. Caselet 10, the last one, okay, again had 1 moderate and 1 difficult. This means that we are looking at a sectional which had a lot of business decision making. And let me reiterate, business decision making can be complex because we may not be familiar with some of the terms used, the jargon used, or even the way in which the thinking is expected to be done, the way in which a judgment is expected to be done. So please do an analysis of this. This decision-making sectional with the number of business cases will provide you far better learning as to how your thought process must be fine-tuned. So revisit these questions, do a very detailed analysis of them, all right? Now, the VA expected attempts, we identified about 3 easy questions. and a huge number of moderate questions, which is very unusual for a verbal sectional of XAT. And a fewer difficult questions, no very difficult questions at all. So considering you would be able to take all the 3 easy questions, about 13, 14 of the moderate questions, 1 or 2 of the difficult questions, and of DM, considering that you were looking at about 10 moderate questions and most others fell into the difficult domain, which is 11 questions falling into the difficult or tricky domain. More than difficult, we're talking of trickiness here. So perhaps, of course, the expectation is that you take more questions, even if they are difficult, because you cannot, simply look at a 10 questions or a, 8, 9 questions and hope to get a good score. So when it gets tough too, you will have to move into the difficult range and look for questions that you can actually take. So the expectation is that you are able to identify 9, 10 of these moderate questions and take them, 3, 4 of the difficult or tricky questions. So what is our expected score and percentile for VA? We're looking at, solving or attempting about 17 questions at an 80% accuracy, and that fetches you a 13.75, much higher than what was pegged as the 98 percentile in the last 2 mocks, right? So understand that can surprise you with slightly easier language, okay? Except that your selection and the way in which you choose the questions must be fine-tuned. So 13.75 for a 98 percentile, 15.25 for a 99 percentile, 18.50 for a 99.5 percentile. Let's look at the lower values. 12, a score of 12 for a 95 percentile, a score of 10.50 for a 90 percentile, a score of 8.75 for an 80 percentile, and a score of 8 is expected to fetch you a 75 percentile. What about DM? DM looks this way. So, somehow managing a 14 questions, selecting a 14, 15 questions at an 80% accuracy, you settle for a 98 percentile with a score of 11. So a score of 11 fetches you a 98 percentile. A score of 13 fetches you a 99 percentile. A score of 15.50 fetches you a 99.5 plus percentile. A score of 9.75 fetches you 95. A score of 8.50 fetches you a 90 percentile. A score of 7.25 fetches you an 80 percentile. And a score of 6.75 fetches you a 75 percentile. Far lower than the scores that were indicated in the previous mock, much lower. 98 percentile in the last mock was 12 point something, 12.75. So we're looking at a drastic, reduction in the number of attempts too. We're looking at least 3, 4 questions fewer, all right? So this is where you stand. Do an analysis of the decision-making sectional. I'm not saying please don't do an analysis of VA. VA, yes, all right. But this DEM sectional, particularly as far as business aspects and business jargon is concerned, will give you a lot of insight. So please do revisit these caselets and take a far better understanding. On that note, I will say goodbye. I hand this over to Shivam sir to give you an understanding of the QA sectional as well as give you an overall picture of percentiles versus scores. Shivam sir, please take over.
Thank you, madam. Good evening, everyone. We'll be starting with the QA section analysis for XAT XAT1. So this is the usual flow in which we'll be conducting our analysis that starts with topic distribution, then question mapping. Here we try to categorize the questions into 3 different difficulty levels. That's easy, moderate, difficult. We discussed expected attempts and scores based on our analysis of the difficulty level. And finally, we map the percentiles with the scores equivalence. So let's begin. This is the topic distribution for UOMZAT1. There were 3 questions from time, speed, and distance, 2 questions from chapters like numbers, ratio, proportion, averages. So it looks like a heavy arithmetic-based section. 2 questions from progression, 2 questions from functions and triangle as well, and 1 question from the remaining chapters. That's profit and loss, linear equation, quadratic equation, time and work, circles, mensuration, and quads and polygons. There were 2 sets of data interpretation, each having 3 questions. One was a simple bar graph based question, whereas the other one was a game based case lit where people were betting on different teams and the rates were quoted. So let's look at the question mapping of easy questions. The first question was in this particular difficulty level is on ratio proportion variation, and this is a question which you could have solved within a minute because it was a simple question of distributing rupees 3456 in the ratio of 7 is to 9 is to 11, and we have to find out the first person's share. So that is going to be 7 upon 27 multiplied by 3456. Yes, that's the answer. Yes, there is some additional information given in the question, but that is not relevant as far as getting the answer is concerned. Okay. Another question. Now, this was an absolute sitter. One root of a quadratic equation was 2 by 3. We have to find out the other root. Now, we already know that the product of the root seems to be 1, and therefore the other root is 3 by 2. That's the answer. So there were very easy questions. A few of them could be simply solved under 30 seconds, according to me. Yes, this might require some calculation, but again, the concept was simple here. We had to find out the sum of factors of 12,500. Now, 12,500 as a number, it's an easy one because it's a 5 cube multiplied by 5 into 2 the whole square. Okay. And once you get the factorization done, you can find out the sum of factors. And finally, the question was not about sum of factors. You had to find out the prime factors inside the sum of factors. Okay, so once you get the sum of factors result, you can easily count the number of prime factors. A question based on time, speed, and distance, where a car and a train were traveling in a perpendicular direction. Okay, the angle between them was 90. The speed of the car was 40, and the speed of the train was 60. We had to find out the rate or the speed at which the diagonal distance keeps on increasing between them. So we have to simply apply the Pythagoras, and the hypotenuse measure will be the rate of change in the distance. A question based on progressions was given, a standard question once again. A ball was thrown up to a certain height, and then there was a rebound ratio was given that was 3 by 4. So everybody by now knows that this question can be done using a upon 1 minus r, and we have to multiply the final answer by 2. So once again, a very simple standard textbook question. A question based on chords and polygons, where a pentagon was given. Pentagon was A, B, C, D, E. And one had to realize that the central angle in a pentagon will be 360 divided by 5. So that comes to 72. Now, once you are able to use that information, you can easily calculate the angle which was asked. A question based on mensuration, where we had to find out area enclosed between 3 circles, right? Now, well, that this might not be that easy question, but because of the fact that everybody all of us has seen this question in our module, right? So once again, it's a textbook question for us, and we could have simply kept the value of r in the equation and solve the question. Question mapping of moderate questions. So this was the one which was based on profit and loss, where if you sell at 2/3 of the price, there is a loss of 40%. So at what price should you sell in order to get a profit of 20%? So this simply works with the assumption of values, and you can solve this question assuming certain values. A question based on average, where we had to find out the maximum value of the highest salary. So this is a question where a mean of 7 values was 6. So addition comes out to be 7 6 are 42, right? The highest value was given, which was 12, and the mod was also given, right? Now, mod was an observation which occurs multiple times in the data set, right? So that was 9, right? So out of the total, you have to keep subtracting the values, like you have to subtract 12, you have to subtract 9 twice, okay? And the remaining values, you should split in such a way that you get one of the values as the highest value, okay? Another question based on averages. So here there were 45 observations and their average was 50. 7 more values have been added and the average still remains as 50. So what was the lowest value of the highest number that was added? Okay, question might sound confusing slightly depending upon the language which was used, but if you just think over it, the middle value will be 50, and then the three values will be 51, 52, 53, and three lower values will be 49, 48, and 47. So if you're able to realize, you would have cracked the question. A question based on numbers was given where it was a 5-digit number that is divisible by 11, and we have to find out the maximum possible sum of digit. Now, well, this required a bit of trial and error, but it was after all a manageable question because you simply had to change the positions of a few digits within the number. So it was a doable one. A question based on time and work where 20% extra time was required to fill up the tank due to a leakage which was placed at 1/5 of the height. So once again, you can go with the assumption of the values here. You can assume that the standard time might be 5 minutes. So 20% extra comes to 6 minutes. You can also assume the capacity of the tank, which is 5 liter because 1/5 of the height is given. So once you start with the assumption of the values like this, you can easily solve this question. A question based on progression where we had to find out the number of APs that can be inserted between, that can be formed with the 27 and 747 as the first and the last terms. Okay, so the overall difference is 747 minus 27, which is 720. And for an AP to be possible, what we need to do is the factors, the number of factors of 720 need to be calculated. Okay, because we get a difference which is equal to the value of the factor. Okay, a question based on functions was given where we had to find out the number of functions from A to B. So both the sets A and B were having 3 members. Number of into functions can be calculated as total number of function minus the number of onto functions. Now total is n raised to n. Okay, because 3 raised to 3. So both the sets were having 3 elements here, right? So 3 raised to 3, the total was 27. And there were 3 into 2 into 1. So 3 factorial values will be onto, remaining ones will be into. A question based on circles was given where we had to calculate the distance between the circles. Now, this one was based on the application of length of transverse common tangent. If you know the formula for length of the transverse common tangent, you can solve this question. The formula for the length of the transverse common tangent is under root d square. D is the distance between the centers minus r1 plus r to the whole square. So if you can put the values over here, now transverse tangent was given. We had to find out the distance between the centers, and once you subtract the radii of the two circles, you can get the distance between the circles. So this was entirely dependent on whether you know the formula of transverse common tangent or no. No, if you know the formula, you could have solved the question. Let's look at question mapping of moderate but time-consuming questions. So there was a question based on TSD where a person was crossing, or rather a train which was 192-meter long was crossing a person who was walking at a speed of 4 meter per second. And there were two different instances given, one in the same direction, the other in the opposite direction. And the time taken to cross between both the cases was 4 seconds. So if you go by the standard approach, you had to make equations, and the calculation gets heavy in this case. Okay. And that's why it was a time consuming question. But if you try working out with the options, these questions can be solved quickly. Another question where two friends were asked to erase a board, and they meet at the 3/5 of the distance, 3/5 of the area of the board, right? And if one person is completely erasing the board, he takes 10 seconds more. So that is where we realize that in order to do 2/5 of the work, he is taking 10 seconds. So in order to do the complete work, he will be taking 25 seconds. Okay. And the time required for both of them to meet was 15 seconds because the first one was completing 3/5 of the work. Okay. So once we realize that, that T is 15 seconds and A is 25 seconds, we can calculate the value of B. Another question where the ratio of salaries was given as 5:6, the ratio of expenses were given as 7:9, and we had to find out who is saving more out of the two-person. Okay, so here one might want to work with different values at different levels. Like you can work on the lower extreme ones, you can work on the higher extreme ones, and if the answer comes out to be consistent, then we can say that okay, out of the two-person, whether A or B is able to save the maximum. Okay, but by working at different extreme, if we get different answers, then we can surely say that anybody can save more. Okay, this is the usual approach that we try. But look at the solution to this question, you might learn something new. Coming to question mapping of difficult questions, sorry. There was a question based on functions where we had to find out the number of natural numbers less than 100 that can be represented as x box x. Now, box x is the greatest integer function. This is the standard notation. Now, once again, this question requires building an approach first with some initial values, and once you are able to generalize with few initial values, you can go on and solve the question, but this always takes time. At times it's difficult to generalize also. Another question was based on linear equation, where 27x plus 47y was equal to 2071, and we had to find out the maximum difference between x and y where they are natural numbers. So this involved applying divisibility rule because we had to express x in terms of y, which was 2071 minus 47y upon 27, and then we have to take divisibility by 27, which might be time consuming and at times difficult also. A question based on triangles was given where the ratio of incircle, circumcircle, and excircle was to be calculated or was to be found for an equilateral triangle. Now we know that for equilateral triangle, the ratio of incircle and circumcircle is 1:2, but there were two options starting with 1:2. And excircle is something that most of the students might sound unfamiliar with. Okay, and that's why this question has been kept under difficult. Another question, once again based on triangle, where we had to calculate the area of quadrilateral. Now, prima facie, this question looks like a question from quadrilateral where four sides were given, but you have to extend it to opposite sides of a quadrilateral and construct a triangle out of this. Now, this might sound difficult as a lot of students might not be able to approach this question in this manner, and hence this can be categorized as a difficult question. Two sets of data interpretation. This one was bar graph. Now, this is where we had 6 towns given. Okay, that is town A to town F. The populations were given on vertical axis, and in the table given below, we had the ratio of men and women and children. Now, looking at these two ratios like M is to W and W is to C, everybody will be able to understand that you can take common ratio, that is men is to women is to children, within any particular town, and you can calculate the required values. Okay, so this was the only logic which was based in this set. And once you are able to understand this logic, there were 3 questions which can be solved taking 2 minutes time each. One question may be spent, 1 minute can be spent on understanding the data. So overall, around 7 to 8 minutes, you can solve all 3 questions, which were of easy to moderate level. Yes, some questions were moderately calculative as well, but overall it was a doable set, should be done. Another question which was based on caselets. So this is where there was a batting going on between different players for 4 match. Okay, the matches were played between MI versus DC, SRH versus CSK, KKR versus KXIP, and RR versus RCB. Now the odds were given. They have been given in the table as you can see. Okay, and they have beautifully explained the meaning of the odds, like what does mi 5 by 12 means. Okay, so this means that if you bet 12 rupees on mi, okay, you get 5 rupees in return. So total you get 12 plus 5, 17 rupees once the match is over. Okay, so that is the interpretation of the odds. Along with that, there were underdogs and there were favorite teams, which was also explained in the set. Okay, now once this understanding is clear, you can solve first two questions from the set. Third one might look challenging, but first two questions can be solved with proper understanding of whatever is given on this screen. So I suggest you can solve two questions in 6 to 7 minutes. Now let's come to expected attempts of QA section. So whatever we have discussed till now in terms of difficulty level, we can summarize this as per this table. So there were 8 questions which can be categorized as easy questions, and as usual we expect you to solve most of these questions. So 7 could have been taken from this. Moderate questions 12, most of them were doable. Okay, so 10 questions can be taken from this. Moderate but time consuming, uh, again, if you can correct the logic of those questions like t is equal to under root of ab and the other questions, okay, you can solve around 1 or 2 questions from here. And again, from 4 difficult questions, we expect you to solve one. So out of total of 28 questions, we think that 20 are doable number here. And based on that, if you are solving 20 questions at an expected accuracy of 85 percentage, you might get 17 correct, 3 incorrect. And based on that, your score will be somewhere around 15.7 or 15.75 or 15.8. And this is doable under a suggested time limit of 50 minutes. Let's look at the detailed table. This is how it goes. As explained, 15.7 is your 98 percentile. The other values like 95 percentile, 90 percentile are available at 13.8 and 11.8 respectively. 80 percentile, 7.85, 75 percentile is the 6 mark. For a lot of colleges, for sectional cutoff, 75, 80, and 90 will work as important benchmarks. So, for example, XLRI, BM, they will ask for approximate 90 percentile cutoff. So, 11.8 is the score that you need to consider for that. Okay. For uh, higher score, higher percentile values, we can look at 99, 16.5, and 99.5 will be available at 21. None of the colleges will ask for sectional as high as 98 or 99. But if QA is your strength and if you get paper like this, then obviously getting a few more marks under a belt will always help you improving your overall score. Let's look at the overall scores and percentile. Pardon this title, it is exact Z1, okay, not UMZ2. I'm so sorry for the same. So 75 percentile, uh, sectional we have already covered under different sections. So just focus on the overall percentiles and the scores. 75 percentile is available at a score of 19. 80 percentile at 21, 90 percentile. 90 percentile once again becomes an important benchmark for colleges like IMT Ghaziabad. So the score required for the same is 26. 95 percentile is around 31.75. Now between these two, 90 and 95, there is one important milestone which is 94, I can say, which is approximate cutoff for XLRI HR course. Okay, so that you can consider at somewhere around 30 to 30.5 marks. 98 percentile, 34.5. Now, once again, between 95 and 98, we have one important milestone, which is 96 percentile. That should be cut off for XLRI BM course, and that is somewhere between 31.75 to 34. So I can map it at around 32.5 to 33 marks. 99 percentile available at 38. None of the institute will ask for that, but this is just for our understanding. 99.5 will be available at 43.75. And yes, we have received a few queries on us from students on they not being able to see their Z percentile. They are only able to see their scores. So yes, after your test gets over, under the analysis section of the test, you will be only able to see your overall score and not the percentile. Okay, and to understand your percentile, this is the sheet which will help you. Okay, so say for example, if you are scoring, let's say 25 marks. Okay, so you can always look at the range. 21 is 80. Can you see this? 26 is 90, and if your score is 25, you can apply linear interpolation. So you can say that my 25 should be somewhere around 88 percentile. So this is how you can find out your approximate percentiles. And these are the approximate percentile cutoffs for leading colleges through XAT. So this is the same slide that I have covered in the last analysis also. So XLRA BM is asking for 90, 80, and 80. Okay, and the overall is somewhere around 96 percentile. So these values become important benchmark for you if you are targeting at XLRA BM. XLRA HRM, lower percentile requirement in terms of quant section, but higher in terms of VALR. So that is 70, 85, and 75. Again, approximate values of sectional percentile. Overall could go to 94 here. And XIMB, which is Bhubaneswar or IMT Ghaziabad, will require 70 percentile as a sectional in each and 90 as the overall. So this brings to an end of analysis for XAT XAT1. We wish you all the best for the rest of the test series for XAT, and hope you are preparing and working on all those areas like QA, DI, especially decision making part and verbal as well. All the best. We are done for now.